Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, guys, welcome to today's webinar titled Agile Quality Assurance and Testing. Let's get started. My name is Ben Hurampali. Again, I'm a pre-sales here at Inland Software, and I will be hosting today's webinar. What is going to be on our agenda? So I'm just going to talk about QA in an Agile environment, just in general. What does that mean and things like that. What do I think it means? Then test management and risk management in Agile specifically. And then after that, in a live demonstration, I'll be talking about traceability, documentation, and reporting throughout the entire Agile lifecycle, but also, of course, focusing on QA. Okay, so as always, the live demo will be followed with the Q&A session, so you guys can ask your questions and I'll do my best to answer them. This webinar is going to be recorded, so you can find it on this link here on our website under webinars and events. That's also where you can register for upcoming webinars, especially this is the third part of our Agile summer classes, and in 2 weeks will be our concluding final part of the Agile summer classes webinars. So that will be Agile operations, DevOps in practice. So that will be in 2 weeks. And on this link that you see here, that's where you can register. Okay, let me start out with this bold statement. Well, it's not really a bold statement, but it's a bold message. So QA is a team effort. I feel like people who are not in QA sometimes mistake QA as like the last gatekeeper of the quality of the product. But people in QA know that this is a continuous team effort where they need to be proactive and observant throughout the entire life cycle of the product. So the QA team has this additional responsibility of making sure that ensuring the quality of a product remains a team effort. Okay, so QA basically means ensuring the quality of the product, but how do you do that? So primarily, you do that by testing. These are the types of testing that you may or may not be familiar with. White box testing and black box testing. So by definition, black box testing is a software testing method in which the internal structure, design, and implementation of the item being tested is not known to the tester. So black box testing. While white box testing is a software testing method in which the internal structure, design, and implementation of the item being tested is known to the tester. So it's the exact opposites. And as you can see on the slide here, white box testing is mainly applicable to lower levels of testing, like unit testing and integration testing, while black box testing is applicable more to the higher levels of testing, so acceptance testing, system testing, regression testing, and so on. Okay, so that was just an introduction of the types of testing, but how do these types of testing models or practices fit into the iterative modeling of Agile? This is probably the biggest challenge for QA in Agile, and that's what I will continue with. So what you see here, we talked about this, you may have seen this slide in our previous webinars. I'm just going to go over it one more time. It's an Agile lifecycle. So here at the start, that's the initiation of the project where you define your high-level requirements, and then you just start the development of your first functionality, then integrate and test. That's iteration 1. Then you develop functionality 2, integrate and test functionality 3, and so on until you have a release, usually of these sprints. And then you have a feedback review, an acceptance test, and then if it's accepted, then you test again and release to market. If not, then you record and incorporate changes, adjust and track, and repopulate features, and move on to the next iteration, and the life cycle starts over again. And the pros of this is, of course, the continuous visibility across the different stakeholders, the developers, clients, and users. But also there's no real test phase here in Agile. So in these iterations, it's just iterations are shorter than in a traditional development model, and you have to test more in less time. So time here is key because there's actually just an iteration phase, and that has to include the testing as well. Also, if you look at Scrum, for example, there's no tester role. So you have Scrum masters and developers and things like that, but there's no real tester role. But it's very important that that doesn't mean that there's no testing or there's no testers, there's no testing. It just means that quality is really everybody's responsibility in the team. Okay, I have to also mention you can probably produce good quality products and be very successful without a dedicated QA if you're quality conscious all the time. But testers still need to force their own role in agile development processes. So that includes things like scaling issues and a bunch of other technical skills that developers do not have. So QA has to define its own role even in agile. Another quote that I want to mention here that I think is pretty explanatory and clarifies things. Kem Kainer said this, that QA stands for quality assistance, not quality assurance. So I think the entire motto of QA in Agile is assist with, not assure quality. So quality assistance, not quality assurance. Okay, so these were a bunch of things that are pretty specific to Agile QA, but I want to kind of show you the contrast between Agile versus traditional testing in a waterfall or a V model development environment. This is more from the point of view of people working in Agile, so it may be a bit subjective, but I still think these are important and correct points. So Agile includes black box and white box testing and usually requires a deep knowledge of internal workings of the application, while waterfall maybe not so much. So it's usually black box testing and there's not necessarily a need for deep knowledge of the application. Okay, the main function of Agile QA is to help produce great applications, while in Waterfall, it's more to kind of certify the quality of the product. In Agile, QA works in parallel with development and testing. So testing is done as soon as new source code is produced, while in Waterfall, you work in branches usually. At the end of milestones, you test, or with a V model. Yeah, basically, same thing. Okay, and then stronger emphasis on automated testing, while in Waterfall there's not much need for automated testing. Only some UI automated testing is performed usually, but obviously this varies. Agile testing is very integrated with the development team, like I said, so they work strongly together, and QA and testing in Waterfall is completely separate from a completely separate team from development. Then in Agile, the key role is to make sure that the expectation from the customers are met, or these acceptance criteria, as they're called in Agile. While in Waterfall, there's not much interaction with the business and their purpose, or the customer, and their purpose is to make sure that the application meets whatever is specified in that requirements document that they write, usually at the beginning of the development. Okay, so we've talked a lot about testing, but that's not the only thing that's part of QA. So let's talk a little bit about risk management in Agile. Because there's actually, it's come to my attention, there's actually no definite consensus on the need for risk management at all when using Agile methodology, because some say that in an iterative model, risk management is irrelevant. And the main reason that that risk management might not seem to fit naturally into an Agile context is because of the probability aspect of risks. So the exact occurrence of a risk is unknown, but does fall within the limits of the project. Some follow the approach of ignoring risks until they turn into issues, which are the unexpected or unanticipated outcomes of risk, and then just manage these issues through the natural sprint progression. So this may not be a bad approach for low-risk projects, but it's definitely not a systematic approach. and things become quite difficult to document and can hurt traceability. And with high-risk projects, it's pretty much unacceptable. So for this reason, I would say it is always safer to choose a more proactive approach. If you have a risk management process, you can take more control over your rising risks. And with the right tool, everything is in one place, everything is traceable and documentable. But after you decide to adopt the risk management process alongside your agile methods, you have to remember that you still have to enforce these processes and these methods, which can be difficult if you think about it, that you're working in small self-governing teams like in Agile or in Scrum. So risks could greatly affect the success of any end product, which also means that they could harm the profitability of the project, or in some cases, or extreme cases, the entire company. So one of the simpler methods that traditional project management techniques recommend, which you can really easily utilize in an agile environment as well, is to manage and monitor your risks in a risk register, what you see here. So what you do with the risk register is that after you've identified the important risks that threaten the success of your project, you can use this register to track and manage those risks. So it usually contains all but only the relevant information about your risks, so it's better to keep it simple and concise. If you have too many fields, that complicates the process and its administration, and people lose the motivation a little bit to keep it up to date and things like that, because that also needs to be administered continuously. So it's also a continuous process. But the properties that you see here, the following properties should be included for sure. A description of the risk, obviously, or as a short summary. When it was identified, its likelihood, severity, and priority, the risk's owner, the response defined to manage or control the risk, as well as the status of execution of these defined risk control activities. Okay, so this is a pretty simple and simple to manage and aligns well with the iterative process of Agile. And adopting a few risk management techniques can prove critical to project success, particularly in high-risk projects, as I've already mentioned. Okay, so that's basically the theoretical part. The last part I want to talk about is a few challenges that arise just with Agile in general, but what you can face with in QA and Agile. And all of these are something that a tool can help you with. Now I'm talking about an application lifecycle management tool like Codebeamer, and that's what I'm going to be showing you after the slide as well, so a demonstration of that. First challenge is just communication with all stakeholders across the entire lifecycle. So this is obviously a challenge. The customers, the clients, the developers, the QA, everybody has to be up to date. They have to have a good understanding of what the customer wants, and transparency and things like that is very important. Organizing development work, obviously, you have shorter time to do this, and if you have a tool that kind of automates and forces processes and things like that, and how to organize all of this, that can be a plus, great plus. Short release cycles complicate the prioritization of items, so you got to keep track of all of those as well. It's really difficult to enforce traceability without a tool. This is especially important for people working in a highly regulated environment where traceability is just a must. Yes, and then adapting to changes within the user stories or requirements while working on products. If you know what you're doing and what you need to be doing, and you're always up to date, and you kind of have this traceability, where did this user story or task come from, what is the context and everything like that, that can greatly increase efficiency and effectiveness in your development. All right, so I see I already have a question, but I will be able to answer that at the end. First, I would like to ask you a few questions. And then at the end, after the demo, I will be able to ask any questions you might have. Okay, first one. What tools are you currently using to manage your requirements, or in this case, epics, user stories, tasks, story points, things like that, if anything? All right, thank you for voting. What's the size of your team or department approximately? Okay, thank you. Um, all right, and then just three more about ALM specific. If it's irrelevant for you, then you don't have to answer. But if you consider ALM tools, what are most important aspects for you? Because this is going to be an ALM tool that I'm going to be showing you. That's why this is so. Collaboration, traceability, compliance, or any tool that supports your development process. Doesn't have to be ALM specifically. All right, a lot of you are saying scalability, traceability, and collaboration. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And then, what are the most pressing challenges in your current development environment, if you know of any, or traceability or test coverage, audit preparation, tool integration? Okay, thanks. And one more. Sorry, last one. Thanks for bearing with me. Is there an ongoing evaluation of ALM tools at your company? Do you know? Yes, no, or are you aware of it at all? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your answers. Now, I am going to jump into. Okay, sorry, I just read the question. So, the question was, I'm sorry, I missed the initial part of the presentation. Which software is this? Influence Software. Yes. So, the company is called Influence Software, and the product is Codebeamer. So that's an application lifecycle management tool. So that's what I'm just gonna start showing you guys as well. It's a browser-based application lifecycle management tool. It's really good for where you can basically manage the entire lifecycle of your project or your product from your highest level epics or requirements um, through the development process, testing, risk management, release, and management of your entire project. So hardware and software included. So it's usually primarily for embedded software development. Okay, and what you do is you manage projects. We have quite a few here. Each tile that you see here is a project, and these are also just pre-configured templates that are actually that help you in your development process, depending on how you develop and what you develop. So, and in which environment, which industry you're working in, things like that. But I'm going to be using this Agile Scrum template for now. So I'm just going to show you a project or template that's primarily for Agile. And as soon as I open this project, you can see there's this wiki page that pops up. And this is kind of like a knowledge base for the project. So everybody who is a member of this project can see this wiki page, obviously depending on the roles and permissions, but that's a different story. and it's really good for collaboration. So really everybody stays up to date. You can define processes and things like that, links into the system, who needs to do what, create reports and dashboards, and everybody really sees what they need to see here. Okay, and then the centerpiece of each project in Codebeamer are the trackers. So if I switch to the trackers, what you see here, these are kind of like folders for your work items. They're all completely configurable. They can have their own attributes or fields. They all have their own workflow. They're all connected to each other, which provides this traceability, but everything is configurable. So you can set it up to really match your processes. This is just a basic template. You can add trackers here, remove anything you don't need. We have a bunch of templates that you can use. Okay, so the way the process and the way this project is set up is you have epics. From epics, you can derive requirements and user stories depending on how you develop, or maybe just user stories. It doesn't really matter. You can configure this. And then from those, you can derive tasks. And then, so your user stories are broken down into specific tasks. And then they can all be assigned to releases and sprints. So you can set up your release with different sprints. And then you see what you need to finish and when. And then user stories can be linked to test cases. And you can also generate test cases from user stories, and then view the coverage of your user stories with these test cases. You can report change requests and bugs to anything, basically. So you have a kind of clean process. If you want, you can have a change control board, and then if you have a requirement or a user story that needs to go through a change, then if you want to have a more strict process that's not really agile, then you set up a change request, and then you have a clean-cut process for a change management. Okay, so if I go into epics, this is what it looks like. This is called our document view. It kind of resembles a document with a summary and a description of these epics. On the left-hand side, you can see the tree hierarchy. In the middle is the document itself, or the epics themselves. And if I select one, on the right-hand side, I can see all of its properties. Okay, now these are just actually fields in this tracker that you can define however you want. Okay, and at the bottom, you can always see the relations. If I have any user stories that I derive from this epic, or any test cases that validate this epic, and so on. And then I can just start working here in the system. I can add changes if I want. I can change text here. I can change properties here. I can assign this to people and things like that. And then I can also derive a user story, for example. If I click on this plus sign, I'm going to derive a user story from this epic, and that will then create a item or a user story in the user stories tracker, and through this epic field that is also automatically linked upwards to the epic that I'm deriving it from. Okay, so as a user, I want to have a comprehensive navigation interface, whatever, anything. And then you can assign it. It's automatically assigned to the same person as the epic is assigned to. It's assigned to the same release as this epic, and so on. Okay, so like this. All right, and then I can view the relationship between all of these items in a traceability browser. So everything is referenced. If you set it up in a way that's, if you set it up in a correct way, then everything is linked to a different item. And through this traceability browser, you can show the dependencies between all of the items that you have in the system. So I started out with my epics, and I want to trace through, let's see here. What I want to do is I want to trace through user stories, tasks, bugs, and if I've committed any code to these bugs. So if I fix this bug with code at all. So I'm just going to click on this preset. And this shows me, if I scroll down, this shows me all of my epics. If I have any related user stories here, or I derived any user stories from these epics. If I've broken these user stories down into tasks, and I always see their statuses as well. And if I hover over it, I see their description. so what this task actually is, and then if I've reported any bugs, and if I've committed any code. So here I actually have, you can manage your Subversion and Git repository as well as Mercurial with Codebeamer, and then you can also commit code into the system. And that way you really have full traceability all the way down from your epics down to the source code. So here I have this epic. I've derived 3 user stories. I've broken this user down into 3 more specific tasks. I reported a bug to this task. And then here I have 3 different commits. So if I go into the bug itself, here in the source code commits, I can open up these commits and I actually see the code itself. And then I can also double click here and add comments to every line of code. And yeah, so on. Okay, another thing that's really important, especially for quality assurance here, is you can actually create reviews here. So that's really good to collaborate with, and you really get feedback. You can involve the right people that are responsible for QA and things like that. And it's kind of a validation of your epics, for example, but it can be anything that you're working on. So you can say, like, I see that this built-in GPS system epic has been accepted, and so as this one and this one as well, because I see that these are green. And let's say I want to validate these 3. So I select these 3, and I go, here, and I say send to review. And then that will create a review of these 3 items, and I can involve the relevant people that need to validate this epic and gather feedback from them. So accepted epics review. And click on next, and here in the reviewers I can add the users that need to review this. So I'm just gonna include myself, and then I'm gonna add 2 other colleagues, and these people need to look at these epics. They will get a notification. They need to look at these epics and say it's accepted or it needs more work. And then I'm going to be the moderator, and then I get to say, okay, I've gathered all the feedback, and I close this review, and I say it can continue, the development of this epic can continue. I can also set a dateline, and I can also say require signature to finish the review. That means that as soon as they say I finished the review, I'll just show you how to do that. So I'm just going to create this review, and I've created a review document with these epics that I wanted. So now I can say accept, and accept this as well. And then I can say, as a moderator, I see the statistics of how my people are reviewing, what the progress is of my reviewers, comments that have been added before or during the review. And then I can say, okay, I've gathered all the feedback, and I can say finish review. And here I have to add my signature. So this is my password. And then I can say finish review or set statuses. And then I can tell them to go on into the next status. So depending on the workflow here. Okay, but I'm just going to say, I just want to finish this review. Okay, and then that's always saved here. So if I go back into this project and jump into the epics that I've just reviewed, I can see that if I open up the detailed view of this epic, this first one, here in the reviews, I can see under all reviews who has reviewed this in the context of a review hub review. I have reviewed this, and I can see that. And then down here, of course, everything has a history that can be seen here as well. So these are the changes that I just made during the webinar, but I can see the entire history from when it was created. So everything is logged, everything is saved. Okay, and then we also have integrated test management. So for here in the user stories, for example, you can generate a test case. If I click on here, I can say generate test case. And then here down in the details and in the relationships, I see the test cases that have been generated here. And then I can actually execute manual test cases here in Codebeamer, which just basically means I add test steps to these test cases. And then when I execute them, I just go in and say, action, expected result, and then if the result actually is what the action, what the expected result was, then I just click on pass or fail, depending on that. So I'm not going to go through that because we're already at 30 minutes in, but an entire integrated test management is also included. And I can also view the coverage of my user stories, for example, here. So I can see most of it is incomplete because I haven't run most of these test cases yet. But I would also see all of the results here as well. Okay, and then one more thing here in the tasks. Like I said, every tracker has its own workflow, so you can set it up in a way that it really enforces your process. So here, if I go into the workflow diagram, this is kind of a complicated workflow for tasks, but this is how it's set up here. And you can say, for example, in QA, then QA passed or QA failed, only the corresponding role is allowed to execute the state transition from the in QA status of the task. So let's see if I have any tasks that are in QA and assigned to me, for example. I can just really easily filter for that. So I'm just going to open up an advanced filter, assigned to me, that's fine. And the status is in QA, but I can actually just see all the ones that are assigned to me. Okay, I have two here in QA. I have one where I can see their source code committed. So let's see what they committed. What is the code? Let me scroll down here. USB plugin software. Okay, I check the code. I can comment on it. This is fine. So I can comment on every line of code, and then I can say QA failed or QA passed. And this is completely configurable depending on the workflow. So I'll just say, okay, this is fine. QA passed. Everything is okay. All right, and then one more thing here is the release management. So you can set up your releases with sprints and then assign all tasks and user stories to these sprints. Assign them story points, and then that will be calculated here, and you can see how your releases and sprints are actually doing. What is overdue? If I go into my sprint 1.1, I have a burn down chart that's kind of not very realistic, but I see it anyways. I can filter for teams and members, priority and things like that. And I can also set up the prioritization if I go into the release planner. Here in the product backlog, for example, I have test cases here, and we just drag and drop, I can assign these all to sprint 1.1. Okay, and I can also see the test coverage of my entire release. So not just user stories here, I can see, okay, I have a requirement here, and that had a verifying test case, and that execution is complete. And I see I have a few user stories that have test cases that verify them, and a few have passed, a few have failed. Okay, and then one more thing, this last thing in this project here in the wiki, under the dashboards, just as an example, I can show you these are actually scaled Agile framework dashboards that we've created with a bunch of reports here. So this is for the portfolio level of your company. So it's scaling Agile, portfolio level, and these are all dynamic dashboards that are based on some sort of source report that I've created. Program level dashboard with a Gantt chart, progress of current features and user stories, status of features, and then down to the team level dashboard. So what each team is doing. So open items in current release, who is working on what are the statuses, burn story points in current release, and things like that. So that can all be managed here. Okay, and like I said, we have manual testing, integrated manual test management, but we also have integration with Jenkins. So I have this, I'm going to switch to another project where we have this integrated out of the box, and it's a very similar. So we just have customer hardware requirements, system requirements, user stories, and so on, and then I have test cases here. And then test cases are broken into manual tests. So I have a few that I've written that I have added. I can add test steps to, and then I can go through and execute these steps and just say passed or failed. And I have a few this automated tests folder and this tracker is integrated with Jenkins. So here we have this integration set up for a Java XUnit and C++ XUnit. And if I go into the Java setup and I go into its configuration, I can just quickly show you what this looks like. So you just have to set up a repository URL, your credentials, and then just a few things, just a few IDs where this integration should feed the information into in the trackers in Codebeamer. Okay, so that's basically it. And I'm going to execute this now. So I'm going to say build now. You can see the build that's going to appear here. It's going to be running. And then as soon as I refresh the page, it's going to create these test cases that I've written, these unit test cases that I've written. They're going to be imported into Codebeamer along with the results that I've just executed here. So let's see this. Okay, it's complete. So I click refresh. Now I see the test cases that it's created. All right, and I can go into the test runs where the actual results are stored of the test cases that were just imported. So let's see here. This is for test coverage. So this actually shows you also the overall coverage, the summary, breakdown by package, then the test results here all the way down. So yeah, a bunch of information is stored here as well. And then we also have one that just shows the results of these unit tests and the actual details of these results. Conclusion that's been added, whether it's passed or failed, and so on. And then what you can do now is you have your requirements, for example, or user stories. And after you've executed these, you can just, from the right-hand side, we have this test case library, and you can just drag and drop these test cases to link them to a requirement. And that way you actually have the coverage of your user stories or requirements in one place. I've linked this to here, and then now you can see the results of your manual and automated tests and what they cover in one place. So that's basically the integration. And then the last thing I want to show here is actually risk management that we've integrated. So we have this medical template. That's where we have a very comprehensive risk management implemented and configured. It's just to show you kind of the complexity that Codebeamer can handle. So there's a lot of trackers here. I'm just going to go into the risks tracker, and just so you see how flexible it is and how much you can configure. Here, if I just select any requirement on the right-hand side in the details, I can see the risk analysis criteria used, hazard type that I've chosen from these hazard types that I've implemented beforehand, the harm, the triggering event, hazardous situation, likelihood that I have to select, severity, and then the risk priority number is calculated, whether it's acceptable, and a bunch of things. Planned risk reduction, these are all basically requirements that I'm planning to take. And then likelihood after reduction, severity, and so on. So there's really a bunch of information that you can pre-configure in the store and manage in one place. So it's very, very powerful. Okay, and then this basically, you can export this into an Excel. You can basically export anything into Office that you see here and import from Office anywhere. But if I export this risk sheet into an Excel, and I use a template, this risk template that we've pre-configured, then you can actually really export all the data that you need. So if I open this up, now this is for the medical industry, so you probably do not need this level of complexity, but it just basically includes anything that you might need. So now I have an Excel export of all of the risks that I have here in this template. So this is literally all of the information that is coming from the risks in the system. So this is just using a template. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. We're already 10 minutes overdue. So I'm just going to ask if you guys have any questions. So now you guys can ask. anything you want. Otherwise, make sure to register for our webinar in 2 weeks, Agile Operations, DevOps in Practice. It's going to be pretty interesting as well. Or I don't know if you thought this was interesting, but that's definitely going to be interesting. No questions? All right, guys. If nobody has questions, then I will thank you guys for your attention. And again, make sure to check out our other webinar recordings on our website. That's also where you can register for upcoming webinars and register for a kind of a demonstration of Codebeamer if it was interesting, that is really configured to your needs. Okay, so thanks again, and everybody have a nice day. Bye bye.